Make a mental note right now that I am speaking in hindsight, defined by me as knowing and understanding Gordon better now than I did at the time of these incidents. The day I met him, I got a call from Liz asking me to come up to her house. She said Warren was about to get the gun and start shooting. I'm thinking Warren is having problems with something in the woods, but when I get up to her house, I see a 65-year-old man beating on the front door. Skinny, he weighed about 165 pounds, soaking wet. He had a long gray beard and was wearing one of those blue traditional Greek fisherman's hats. Imagine the scene as I'm pulling up to the front door of Liz's house. He is now pacing back and forth on the front porch screaming, "I know you did it. I know you did it. Come outside, you little son of a bitch." Now I'm outside of my truck, walking up to the porch, and Gordon's attention turns to me. He explodes off the porch, doing what in that moment looked like a double overhand chopping motion. I guess his plan was to chop me on top of the head. My natural reaction was to sidestep and toss him, and he goes bouncing across the ground on his face, grass and mud, all in his mouth and teeth. I'm not sure if you have ever seen a man get even more angry when he realizes that you just made a fool of him. Having plenty of time being a cop, it would just be me and someone one-on-one. The first time you put them down, they can write it off as you got lucky, so they come again. The second time is more ferocious than the first. They lie to themselves. Well, Gordon comes at me again. This time he pulls out a knife, and as he lunges towards me, I grab his hand trying to get control of the knife and can't. So I foot sweep him and toss him to the ground and run for my weapon in the truck. As I'm running to the truck, the front door opens, and it's Warren, and he shoots right at the ground where Gordon is. Old, slightly rusted shotgun, and he says, "Now, Mr. Gordon, I know you're upset, but if you get up and attack my dad, I'm gonna have to kill you." Pause right here and understand this was the first time I realized that Warren, who is 18 years old now, considers me his dad. Gordon looks at him and says, "Your daddy is in prison where you belong. You know those things came over and killed all my dogs, my chickens, and my hogs. They never get to going crazy like this unless you or your granddaddy goes out into the woods and messes with them." Warren breaks the shotgun and loads 2 more shells and says, "Now you're talking about my dead granddaddy. Say one more word and I am going to prison." Looking at the kids, I just knew he was serious. It was during the silence that Liz comes out the door and says, "Gordon, you know you're wrong for coming to our house like that. I know you miss Frank, but you can't be doing these kinds of things, Gordon, or we are going to have to call the law on you or worse." Gordon stands up and tears start to flow, I mean a river, and he says, "Those things, they took it all, killed everything, Liz. What am I going to do? Stop and pause right here and listen." As this all unfolded right in front of me, I started to realize something. These people were all bonded, united in the trauma they experienced at the hands of the things in these woods. Because she takes the shotgun from Warren and tells everyone to come inside the house. Now, we are all sitting at the table and Gordon apologizes to me. It was looking in his eyes right then and there that I saw it. He was bipolar, being an ex-cop. It's this look people have in their eyes. It's like right behind their eyes there's a fire raging, and the right words are the gasoline. Well, we are sitting down, and he starts to explain that he had spent yesterday picking up body parts of his dogs and his chickens and his hogs, and it's just too much for him to do alone. Then he talks about how they were his food source and his companion ever since his wife died of cancer, and he breaks down crying again. "I can't do this alone," he says. Then he turns to Warren and apologizes, saying, "I came here for your help and I insulted you. I'm sorry, Warren. I've known you since you were a little boy." With the situation now in hand, Liz says, "Now, Gordon, remember the first time this happened. Your livestock insurance covered those animals. You still got that." And you see this light turn on inside his head. He says, "Yes, I still have it, but you know, my wife was the one who handled all that stuff. I'm not that good of a reader at all." That's when Liz volunteers me and Warren to help Gordon. It was also during this time period when I learned why Gordon was eyeing my wife. Imagine the scene. We head over to Gordon's place. I'm not sure if you have been able to gather much about the terrain, but Liz's house was uphill. Gordon was a lot like me, downhill on the other side of their property, except he was further back off in the woods. In fact, he was uncomfortably deep in the woods to me. At least Liz and I could get to the road without traveling through the woods. Not so for Gordon. When we got to his house, it looked normal until you go inside. Once inside, he had 2 sets of doors. A standard door that looked normal, but inside, behind that, was another door frame with these metal doors. Looking around the house, there were metal shutters inside the house with metal latches that would support them. Then I saw the picture of his wife. Her name was Melonie. And when I tell you my wife looked like her younger sister, I realized that all those times he drove by in his truck staring. He was not being a perv, he was thinking about his wife. He walks us quickly through the house and out the back door, and when we walk out that door, the stench of death is everywhere. Looking around, it was nothing but death. Animal parts thrown all over the place like Michael Myers had stopped over for a party. Black garbage bags full of chicken, hog, and dog parts. It was crazy, and this was the first time I ever saw the level of destruction that these creatures from the woods were capable of. Sheer savagery. This was not done for food. This was done in spite. You understand? This was done because they could. They wanted to. Warren says, "You know, it's going to take a hard rain for this stench to go away, right? But let's get this over with." So we all start the task of picking up the remains, and it's over 50 chickens, 10 hogs, and 5 of his dogs. The dogs were the worst. Lungs ripped out, skin peeled off. It was sad. Warren wanted to burn it, but Gordon told him the last time they used the policy they had to call the insurance company first to make sure they didn't need pictures or anything like that. Now Gordon is looking at me and says, "Will you call them?" So we head inside, leaving Warren out there in the carnage, and call the company. Well, the first person I talked to just doesn't seem right. The man came across as if he was already aggravated, so I decide not to give him the information but to ask him questions. I pretend that I have a bunch of livestock and that I am experiencing wild animal attacks, and ask him what coverage he would recommend. He says he is in claims and not sales, but I tell him then he knows what the company would pay for. So he is the perfect person to talk to. It was during that conversation that I learned the dogs were not covered, nor the chickens, only the swine. Also, there was a limit to the amount that this company paid with the mortality clauses, and they needed a special rider to cover wild animal attacks. By the time we hung up the phone, I was dazed, saying, "There is no way they are going to cover this." Well, Gordon gets up and walks over to the kitchen, opens the cabinet, and takes out this binder. It has tabs and everything, opens to insurance, and notes written by his wife. "Gordon, or whoever is helping him take care of this is our livestock mortality policy. It covers up to $75,000 in case of fire, wind, and freeze. However, we have the rider that covers up to $50,000 if our animals are killed. Call this number, give them this policy number, and tell them you have pictures of the kills and will mail them to them. They won't ask many questions, have not in the past." So I follow the instructions and pretend to be Gordon, and everything goes smoothly. The woman on the phone says she needs us to email her pictures of the livestock, just to confirm that it was a wild animal attack. Now you can hear her reading the script, and she says, "Wait, there is a note here in the system from the last claim. There will be no adjuster visiting the site." She hesitates for a second and stops reading out loud. Then she says, "Was there an incident where an adjuster was injured on your property, Mr. Gordon?" And he shakes his head, remembering I'm pretending to be him. She says, "Okay, sir, that is all I need. I will process your claims based on what's here in the system. Do you still have 87 swine on your property and 3 cattle and 2 horses?" Then Gordon looks at me. I'm like, "Yes." She says, "Great, thanks, I will be in touch soon," and hangs up the phone. Off the phone, I ask Gordon what the woman was talking about, and he says that happened long ago. I say, "Gordon, what happened?" And he starts to walk away, heading outside. So I follow him, insisting, "What happened to the adjuster?" He replies, "I don't want to talk about that." As we go back and forth, Warren chimes in while he is holding the paw of one of the dogs and says, "You mean that crazy man who tried to prove that you and Miss Melonie were lying and went missing?" Warren starts to laugh. He was the dumbest city boy I have. If you travel all the way from sunny California and people tell you there are monsters in the woods, why in the hell would you go into the woods? I mean, look around, look at this. He picks up a half-gnawed-on chick and says, "How do you fake this for insurance fraud?" Gordon goes quiet for a solid 15 minutes. Then he just starts talking about him and Melonie, his wife, and how they met. She was a liberal girl from Austin, Texas. You know how city girls can be. They think the whole world owes them something. That was my Melonie. Then add to that her father being a big-time lawyer. Yes, we were like night and day. When she decided I was the one for her and decided to abandon that city, her parents lost it. Her friends turned their backs on her. It was just me and her, so when we got this house, it was a true victory for us. Warren, you were just a little kid back then. Liz and Melonie used to take turns babysitting you. In fact, you were here the night it all started. The very first night they came and took everything from us, you were right there in the living room with Melonie playing with a red ball. I remember it like it was yesterday. Back then, we had this shaggy, soft rug. You were lying on your back, tossing that ball in the air, when we heard the pigs start squealing, the worst sound I have ever heard. The sound of a painful death filled with fear. Then the sound of flesh being torn like paper bags. Melonie grabbed you and covered your ears as I went out the back door with a flashlight, only to see something that a man should not have to see. Monsters. Real wolf-like monsters, killing everything. This was a pack of 9 in total. 2 had attacked my dogs. I had 7 dogs back then, and those dogs didn't stand a chance. The rest were slaughtering everything. I'm standing there in shock, knowing I have Melonie and Warren in the house with me, and if they came to the house, there was nothing I could do. So we put you in the truck and left, Warren. We went up to Frank's place. I'm ashamed to say it. But we hid from them. The entire time, Frank was saying he and I needed to go down there and command them to leave, and if they didn't, we could kill them. But I was afraid, and Frank said it was my land, my choice. Then the adjuster came, the entire time he was talking, looking over at Warren like he remembered anything he was saying, and Warren was looking at me like, I was a kid. I don't remember any of this. Gordon goes on to explain that, firstly, the adjuster insisted they leave the property as it was until he arrived to see for himself, or else the claim would not be paid. Imagine a mess 3 times worse than what we had just cleaned, sitting there for 2 weeks in the summer heat. Then when this fool finally came to town, he looked around and said he couldn't tell if it was a wild animal attack. Gordon explains that he wanted to kill the guy right there and bury him on his land. However, Melonie had been reading the policy and challenged him, and the guy took it personally. He said he needed evidence of the wild animals. Gordon recounts how the adjuster planned to go into the woods himself to look for evidence. He says that when he warned the guy it was a bad idea, the man essentially backed him and Melonie into a corner, creating a conundrum. If there really was a wild animal, why wouldn't they let him search the property for evidence day or night? According to him, if they didn't allow it, it meant they were hiding something. It was Melonie who pointed out that, according to the contract, he had the right to inspect the property for 48 hours. However, she insisted that he call his company and speak to his boss. So Gordon, Melonie, Frank, and Mr. Satcher called his boss in California to explain the situation. Satcher's boss was confused as to why he needed to be informed, and Frank explained it straightforwardly. There are wild animals, and then there are animals that are wild. These are the latter and not the former, sir. We just want to make it clear that if something goes wrong, it will not have anything to do with us. We will be calling the sheriff as well to let him know. Satcher's boss seemed distracted and distant but agreed, and then just hung up. Frank told Satcher, "Listen, I will go with you so you can see what did this and I can get you back out of there safely." Satcher just laughed at Frank's warning, boasting about his years of experience facing mountain lions, bears, cougars, and other wildlife. Despite Frank's repeated assertions that these were not ordinary wild animals, but rather animals that act wild, Satcher didn't listen. 2 days later, he went onto the backside of Gordon's property and was never seen again. However, every night his screams for help could be heard, yet he remained unseen. The sheriff and others were involved in the search. but they found nothing, not a trace. And still, at night, his cries of "Help, help me," echoed through the area. Frank believed it wasn't Sacher, but one of the creatures trying to lure people into the woods. As I listened to this story, my hair started to stand on end. It was insane, but it happened. When I asked Liz about it, she confirmed that, yep, poor Mr. Sacher. They took him, took his body and his voice. She speculated on how many people that man's voice had led to their deaths over the years. There are things in these woods that change skin, steal voices. They look human, but they are far from it. Liz explains that people often misuse the term skinwalkers, not understanding its true meaning. To walk in human skin refers to something far more sinister than simply wearing animal skins. She suggests asking Gordon for more details, as he has more experience with these beings. They would often come to him disguised as Melonie. She recounts how Gordon, while drunk one night, accidentally let one of these creatures into his house. He and Frank had to confront it, but it wouldn't die easily. It's frustrating when someone has all the answers to your questions but refuses to talk. That was the case with Gordon until my wife spoke with him. Then he began to open up about everything. He shared that for about 60 days after his wife's funeral, he thought he was losing his mind. He would hear her voice calling him from the woods, but something always felt off, as if his gut was telling him it wasn't her. So he ignored it and often sought company with Frank and Liz, especially when he felt lonely. One night, with Frank, Liz, and Warren in Little Rock, Gordon went to a bar for some drinks. One drink led to another, and soon he was driving home, drunk. He sat on his sofa thinking about Melonie and how much he missed her, eventually falling asleep. Around 4 a.m., he woke up to the sound of someone pounding on the back door and calling his name. Gordon describes the disorienting sensation of waking up still drunk, blurred vision, the overpowering smell of bile, and muffled hearing. In this state, he flung open the back door and, confronted with what he believed to be another one of those creatures, yelled, "What the fuck do you monsters want now?" Gordon, having already lost everything, opened the door to find no one there. In his frustration and grief, he stepped outside and cursed loudly, proclaiming that the tormentors would never find peace and would roam the woods until they died. Then he turned back to go into his house, leaving the door open behind him. He was halfway to the sofa when he heard his name. Turning around, he saw Melonie standing at the threshold. She said, "Aren't you going to welcome me home, Gordon? Let me in." Gordon knew instantly it wasn't his Melonie. The skin was peeling by the ear. Despite recognizing this, his longing for her was so strong that he invited her in. But as soon as the words left his mouth, the creature accelerated in a blink and was upon him, choking him. Gordon found himself in a desperate struggle, made worse by the creature mimicking his deceased wife's voice, pleading, "You're hurting me, Gordon," causing him to hesitate. Imagine the horror of beating something that looks like your dead wife with an iron skillet until it flees the house. That's what Gordon endured. When he finally talked to Frank, they both had to fight it off, engaging in a 3-night battle. Each time, the creature's skin regenerated to look just like Melonie. The emotional torture of repeatedly killing his wife was unbearable until they discovered that fire was the key. This revelation happened by accident. Trapped against the wall with his grill, with Frank knocked out on the ground, Gordon was being choked by the creature. It threatened to send him to be with his wife, and in a moment of instinct, he grabbed lighter fluid and squirted it in the creature's face. The terror on its face was evident, and when Gordon reached for the lighter, the creature stopped choking him and struggled to prevent him from lighting it. That was when Gordon realized that fire could kill it. After a tense struggle over the lighter, he managed to set its face ablaze. The creature panicked, running in circles. Gordon doused it with more lighter fluid, causing its entire body to catch fire before it ran into the woods, never to be seen again. Are you still there? Hello? Remember, I encountered the same thing and had no clue what I was dealing with. It all made sense now why it presented itself as Elizabeth. Then the winter months rolled around, bringing quiet. I despised the winter because it felt like we were suspended in limbo, knowing that when the weather changed, it would all start again. It was always in the back of our minds that they would return when the conditions were right.